Welcome to Legal Clarity, the podcast brought to you by Hatch Bruner Solicitors. Join us as we explore legal insights, real case studies, and personal stories designed to inform and empower. In this episode, dispute resolution solicitor Janet Lane breaks down a complex but common area of law: property disputes. She'll explain the most frequent causes of property disputes, including boundary issues, trespass, and adverse possession. How to prove ownership in the event of a dispute, the ways many disputes can be resolved without the need for court proceedings, and when it's time to seek advice from a solicitor. If you're dealing with uncertainty over property boundaries or facing a disagreement with a neighbour, this episode offers clear, expert guidance to help you understand your rights and options. What are the most common property disputes?
The most common disputes are related to boundaries or encroachment through hanging over eaves or guttering. Usually there's been some sort of adverse possession, i.e. a boundary's been changed and somebody believes that a small amount of their land has been taken, or there are disputes where there's been a new construction, and often it's obstructions of right-of-way or overhanging trees and foliage, etc.
How do you prove ownership in a dispute?
Usually when a boundary dispute arises, most homeowners begin by looking at the title plans that they have. However, this is not always the best place to start. In most cases, the title plan doesn't establish the precise position of boundaries or rights of way, but rather the existence and the general position of these boundaries or rights of way. So therefore, further investigation is needed. And determining the position of a boundary often means going back to any original conveyance plans or documents, or those of the neighbouring properties, to find a description or measurements of the respective boundaries. And in some cases, this will simply be a description of the physical features on the ground at that time. But if that's not fruitful, sometimes the only thing that you can go by is the opinion of an expert.
How can disputes be resolved without going to court?
Sadly, if an agreement cannot be reached, it can take several years to reach a point where the court's in a position to make a final judgment on the position of a boundary. And legal costs can often be disproportionate to the value of the land in dispute. And therefore, the best thing to do at the beginning is to take legal advice, either from a solicitor or advice from a chartered surveyor as to the actual positions of boundaries and or rights of way. And this can avoid a dispute altogether. If not, negotiations by mediation are always a helpful way of resolving the matter, or even through correspondence. But the main thing with disputes, if we're going to avoid them going to the court, is to actually take some advice at a very early stage, or to try and resolve the matter informally wherever you can.
When should you involve a solicitor?
As I've already mentioned, you should see a solicitor at the very earliest stage that you can. Quite often people will misunderstand the identification of boundaries or the rights of way, and can misinterpret the land registry documents. So it is a good idea just to take advice at a very early stage to be able to avoid any problems, or to be able to resolve the matter informally. Taking legal advice at an early stage can save both costs and times when determining the position of a boundary and the merits of bringing a claim or defending a claim. And so it's always a good idea to take your advice at a very early stage, and at least before you've got into any discussions or correspondence with neighbours. There are some myths that are out there with regard to being able to identify the position of a boundary, and therefore it's important to get the correct information at the early stage. Also, taking advice from a chartered surveyor is a good idea, and that should be done at the very, very earliest opportunity. Parties can also try and reach agreement through mediation, and your solicitors can advise on suitable ways of dealing with the matter at the earliest stage and before parties become embroiled in any sort of dispute.
Thank you for listening to Legal Clarity, a podcast brought to you by Hatch Bruner Solicitors. For more information, make sure to check out our website www.hatchbruner.co.uk. That's www.hatchbrenner.co.uk.